without the Golden God. Sonic's eyes widened as he watched the Master Emerald begin to crack and fade away in his hands. His legs edged as his brain pounded against his skull with a certain ferocity, as only moments ago he'd been pummeled into the ground with a sickly crack. He could only now assume that it had been one of his ankles, feeling the intense throb as he huddled close to Tom and Maddie.
What? No.
He began a mantra as Robotnik stepped closer in his machine, his voice cracking as the dull shards fell to the ground. His fingers trembled as his breath hitched, his thoughts running a mile a second. This couldn't be happening. No, not again. His eyes burned as he realized what this really meant for him, for his family. The emerald was gone, the power it held gone with it, and that meant Sonic was going to die. Tom and Maddie were going to die.
You have to get away from me. I'm the one he wants.
His eyes swiftly met Maddie's as she gently held onto his hand in reassurance.
Hey!
Though her voice wavered as she spoke to reassure him, she shook her head.
We're not going anywhere. We're family.
Sonic turned his head to Tom, eyes wide as he mentally begged him to be reasonable, get Maddie and run. But somehow, he already knew what he was going to say, and he knew it was a worthless fight. They would never leave him there alone. They would never leave him, period. End of story. He couldn't decide if it was a good or bad thing.
And family sticks together.
Tom took Sonic's hand without hesitation, holding it tight and close. Sonic stared at their hands holding his, forcing the sob that was bubbling up in his throat to stay down, to stay strong. They were willing to die with him. He raised his gaze back to Tom, seeing his eyes already on him.
No matter what.
The man he'd come to love as father, though he wouldn't ever admit it, it seemed finalized. His mind, along with Maddie's, was already made up. He closed his eyes tightly, his ears flickering as he heard the whirring of Robotnik's machine over their heads, feeling Maddie and Tom pull him close, staying as close as physically possible. Sonic was defeated. The urge to cry swallowed down as he rested his head against Maddie's shoulder, feeling Tom rest his head against his.
I love you guys.
Sonic mumbled softly, a part of him still wishing that Tom and Maddie would run away, save themselves, but another part of him was clinging to them, hoping they'd stay with him.
We love you too, Sonic.
Sonic shot up like a rocket, breath heavy as he heaved, his hand reflexively flinging up to wipe his eyes as he sniffled. A nightmare, that's all that was. He was alive. He was breathing. Tom and Maddie were alive, and they were breathing. Breath. He shivered as he pushed himself up from his bed, nearly stumbling once he was on his feet, disregarding how the world tilted underneath his feet at first. He quickly made his way down the attic stairs as quietly as he could, hesitating as he arrived in front of Tom and Maddie's closed bedroom door. He shouldn't bother them. They needed their rest, especially after dealing with Robotnik. But he needed them. He needed Tom's hand holding his, Maddie's fingers coursing through his fur. He needed to hear their breaths and see the rise and fall of their chest. He needed to be sure they were safe. He finally set his hand on the door handle, twisting it as he set a certain amount of his weight against it. The door didn't creak like it usually did as he pushed it open, and Sonic knew it was because Tom finally put the WD-40 he'd been talking about on the hinges. It made easing into their room 20 times easier than before. The last thing he wanted to do was wake them. Sonic quickly pulled himself up onto the bed, carefully shifting to lean on his knees as he looked at both of their chests, focusing on the rise and fall. Hearing both of them breathe easily, he let out a soft sigh, closing his eyes as the exhaustion began to settle on his shoulders. It was 4 in the morning after all, and he was never one to stay up unless he was causing trouble in Seattle or other nearby cities.
Sonic, don't awake.
He peeled his eyes open at the sudden call of his name, gaze finding Tom, who was now sitting up in bed, The lamp on his side of the bed turned on. How long had he closed his eyes? It should have only been a few seconds. He trailed off, trying to find the words in the lump that refused to leave his throat. How does he explain that he'd had a nightmare about dying with his parents? A nightmare where the 7 Chaz emeralds hadn't activated due to the love he felt, leaving him and his parents to suffer the fate that Robotnik had wished upon them for nearly a year. He was truly lucky that the emeralds had felt his need to save Tom and Maddie, that they'd felt his love for them, for Tails and Knuckles.
Nightmare.
Tom provided the word easily, and in a way, it scared Sonic that he was able to understand as quickly as he did. Another one of his dad senses that he wouldn't believe was real until it came to good use.
Yeah.
He murmured quietly, a quietness that was rarely used by the Blur unless he was truly at a loss for words.
Do you want to talk about it?
Tom wasn't pushing, and Sonic could tell. He knew that if he said no, Tom would leave it be until he felt like discussing it, but he didn't want to say no. He wanted nothing more than to share his thoughts and fears with his dad, but he couldn't quite get the words out of his mouth. He couldn't even find the right words. Tom reached out with ease, gently tugging the Blur's arms so he'd crawl up beside him, and he'd quickly done so, curling against his father's side and practically basking in the warmth he provided.
You can talk to me about anything. I know.
He whispered, sighing as he rested his head against Tom's chest.
I had a nightmare about the fight, that the whole Golden God thing didn't happen and I couldn't save you and Maddie. You guys just sat there with me and accepted the fact we were going to die, and
Tom seemed to understand that it was growing hard to punch the words out of his throat. Choosing to wrap his arm tightly around the blue Blur curled against his side, Sonic closed his eyes tightly, his fingers curling in the fabric of Tom's shirt.
I got it.
Tom mumbled softly as he raised a hand to course through his son's fur, hoping to put him at ease, even if it was just in the slightest.
I'm too kid. I've nightmares about not being able to protect you and Maddie, but you don't need to worry about it anymore, but...
Easier said than done.
I do so.
He raised his voice, cringing when he remembered that Maddie was still sleeping beside them.
I know that you guys love me and I love you both, but I need you guys to be okay, even if I won't be.
Tom pursed his lips together, and Sonic tried to ignore the way the air built a tense wall between them. The worst part about talking about this was the way Sonic felt about it, wanting to do everything in his power to protect Tom and Maddie, and no Tails too.
Sonic.
Tom sighed as he tried to outline what he wanted to say in his mind.
You're just a kid, alright, sure, I'm like Super Speed now, Super Form of Emerald, but you're my kid first. I will always think like a father before I think like anything else. We need you to get just as much as you need us to be okay, alright? Our worlds revolve around, you know. Happens when you sign up to be a Vahovsky kid.
As much as Sonic wanted to argue, tell him that's unreasonable, and he shouldn't think about his well-being before his own, he didn't. He'd be a hypocrite if he did that, and he wouldn't trade Tom and Maddie's love and care for anything else in the world. They'd offered their home to him, and now Tails and Knuckles, and they'd done it without sparing a second thought. He loved Tom and Maddie. He loved everything they did for him and everything they'd continue to do.
You're really kicking up the dead notch, huh? Don't it, Lord?
He couldn't help but chuckle as he derived the conversation into small banter.
I am, and it'll only get worse from here.
Tom chuckled too, his fingers easing through the fur behind his son's ears as he settled back into a serious tone.
I know.
Sonic mumbled softly as he listened to Tom's hurt thud against his chest in a calming beat.
I love you too, Dad.
Tom let out a soft sigh, unable to prevent the small adoring smile that turned his lips as he gazed down at his kid, who was clearly teetering along the edge of falling asleep. His gaze flickered to Maddie for a small moment, not missing how she carefully rolled over, reaching over to rub her thumb along Sonic's cheek, easing him into a losing battle with sleep.
Get some more Sonic when you wake up.
He promised so easily because he knew it was true. He knew that Sonic would fall asleep, most likely with him and Maddie close behind, and they'd wake up with the blue ball of fur between the both of them.
You couch all that.
He asked her jointly. Maddie nodded tiredly as she kept her gaze settled on their son.
I did. I woke up after you turned the lamp on, honestly.
She teased her husband, watching him huff a laugh before turning off the lamp on his bedside.
He's too young to be worrying about this kind of stuff.
Tom spoke softly, even though he knew it'd take a lot more than that to wake up Sonic.
He's 13.
He's 13 and a talking hedgehog with sonic speed. He's different from us. As long as there's people like Robotnik out there, he's not gonna be as safe as we want him to be. And he's always gonna want to protect us, especially since he knows he can.
She reminded him. Tom knew Maddie was right, and she usually always was. He appreciated that she didn't just tell him what he wanted to hear. She told him the truth no matter the circumstances, and it was one of the things he loved most about her.
I want to protect him, May, not the other way around.
The last battle had been a real eye-opener for all of them, it seemed, leaving both Tom and Sonic wanting to protect the ones they held close. It was frustrating, remembering how broken Sonic had sounded as the emerald shattered, how defeated his relentless kid had looked, and how easily he'd accepted he was going to die. It was something Tom never wanted to witness again, and he'd make sure he wouldn't for as long as he was alive.
I know, honey, but you know the protection goes both ways.
She always knew what to say to put him at ease.
You protect him, he protects you. That's how you two work. Besides, you hurt him. He likes being a kid. He knows he has more growing up to do.
Tom's gaze shifted back to Sonic, watching the fur fall back into place as he gently raked his fingers along the backside of one of his ears. He exhaled softly, shifting into a more comfortable position without jostling his kid too much. His worry wasn't completely sifted through, and he knew Sonic's had been either. But for now, he would take notes from the blue blur and fall back into a restful sleep. It seemed easier with his son under his arm.